Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, is with us. We also have Abhijit Das, who's a noted international trade expert and the former head of the Center for WTO Studies. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining in. So every time we get a soundbite out of the White House, I mean, hopes go up. But as our colleague was just, discussing, and that's his source-based information, there seems to be some headway. Now, on the issue of Russian oil, Mr. Palit, now, would it be okay to give in, a card that you have to play to perhaps win the overall hand? I mean, is that how you would look at it? Because that's the biggest logjam over the last month and a half, 2 months.
Survi, thank you so much for inviting me to the show. As always, a pleasure to be with you. And let me take this opportunity to wish you a belated happy Diwali to everybody on the show. Lovely to see Abhijit again after a very, very long time.
To you too, sir. Happy Diwali to you and to Abhijit and all your near and dear ones.
Thank you so much. I think the problem, Survi, that is coming up each time we discuss this subject is that India really has not got a chance to set its agenda in these negotiations. It's reacting to an agenda set by the US. Now, if that is the way we are going forward, and this I have mentioned before on a number of occasions, if you look at the countries which have cut deals with the US, none of them are actually sure about whether they have achieved win-win outcomes or not. They have actually basically accepted what has been given to them after prolonged negotiations using a large number of economically, I would say, suppressive and coercive tactics. You raised the specific question of whether the Russian oil commitment on part of India will create a better ground for the conclusion of whatever talks are going on. Well, it might, but let's also not forget that it's not just the Russian oil that it has stake. India was earlier threatened with probable tariffs if India continues to lift Venezuelan oil. The same might come back if India starts lifting Iranian oil. And always there is this larger issue of India picking up oil from anybody from within the BRICS group. So I think if there is a conclusion that is being looked at, we need to accept it with the view that this is just going to be a pause. Maybe if one can take the risk of defining it as a ceasefire. There's going to be a pause, but this is not going to end. There's more that is going to come by way of India, by way of more extractive demands, which will take away the 25% in the beginning, the secondary tariffs. But let's not forget there's another 25% that we need to handle, along with transshipment tariffs and the Section 232 tariffs, which are a large number of tariffs by themselves. And Surya, I'll end by saying that perhaps the time has come to reflect on the fact that what if the reciprocal tariffs are struck down by the US Supreme Court, which they're quite likely to be. In that case, this whole bunch of negotiations will actually become, nothing. Because then in that case, the focus has to shift to the Section 232, the Section 301 tariffs that might subsequently come on US. And all this hard energy invested in talks would come to none.
So just to sum it up, Mr. Palit, you seem to be indicating that India may not want to yield entirely and maybe too quickly on its Russian oil purchases?
I wouldn't have actually done it. I would have taken my time to watch out and see that what's panning out, because honestly, there's no end to it. The history of the last 6 months and even prior to that shows that the way things are panning out right now, it's a geo-economic turf battle. If India commits to something with respect to the United States, there are going to be pressures that are coming from the other side. Unfortunately, India is one of the largest middle powers in the world, is caught in this game between the US and China. Europe is suffering from it. Australia is partly suffering from it. There are other countries who are going to face the brunt of it. The room for maneuver for India at this stage is somewhat limited because, as I said at the beginning, India is not setting the agenda for any of these discussions. So it's best for India, perhaps, to just take stock of the situation as it emerges, look at various scenarios, and none of the scenarios, trust me, is going to be a win-win situation.
Mr. Das, come in, right? What if India were to make just a token reduction in the Russian oil imports, as our colleague Parikshit was talking about, say 100, 2,000, barrels per day? Would that give Trump an optic of a win and enable an India-U.S. trade deal? Because, this India stance on this energy security, because of that, our negotiations have been very, very long drawn out. It started in the January of, 2025, and we've still not managed to conclude a deal so far. So what if, we were to just cede a little bit of space, a token reduction in Russian crude oil purchases? Would that help? Is that the right strategy to do?
Thank you, Surabhi. It's always a pleasure to be back on your show, and it's great to meet Amitendu Palit, my long old friend. Let's remember that the Russian oil purchase is a negotiating chip in U.S. pocket. To what extent they will use it, we have already seen negotiations have got drawn out because of it. Certainly, a token reduction might help, but that has to be seen in the larger perspective of what is US getting in return from India, and how comfortable would India be in conceding to the US demands. And those demands would be in the area of agriculture. It could also be in the area of digital trade. So the extent to which US wants to leverage the Russian oil deal to extract concessions in other areas, that is what will determine the overall contours of the deal. And I would really agree with Amitendu that there is no finality ever to any deal with the United States under President Trump. We might have something today, and for some other reason, Trump might impose additional tariffs in the future, even after the deal. So we need to be cognizant. We need to keep some chips, some concessions in our pocket. We should not give all the concessions at one go. So to cut a long story short, yes, the prospects of a deal have brightened. Bit of a token reduction in Russian oil purchases will provide President Trump the necessary optics for declaring victory. But at the same time, India needs to guard its red lines, not only in agriculture, dairy, but also in the sector of digital trade.
All right. Mr. Das, hi, good morning, gentlemen, and thanks a lot for joining. And Mr. Das, I wanted to ask you about what would qualify as a win for India, and what would qualify as a failed attempt, because there has to be some give and take. They have to meet at some line, but what would qualify as a win?
Win for India really would be if we look at what were the tariffs when President Trump and Prime Minister Modi agreed to initiate negotiations on a bilateral trade agreement. That was on 13th February. So a real win for India would be, while we reduce our tariffs, US also reduces the tariffs which prevailed on 13th February, which is very unlikely to be the case. So even if the US gets rid of the Russian oil penalty, even if the reciprocal tariffs comes down from 25 to say 10% or 15%, we are still worse off compared to where we were on 13th February. So I really find it difficult to categorize any outcome which retains some element of the reciprocal tariffs, while India reduces its tariffs on US, as a win-win. And very rightly, that's what Amitendu has also said, that a deal where India reduces tariffs, whereas US does not reduce the reciprocal tariffs completely, it would be very difficult to characterize that deal as a win-win.
Gentlemen, very quickly, we only have 30 seconds left on the chat, but let me ask you this. Again, going back to the oil issue, I mean, this morning we also have additional news, right? US has slapped additional sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft. And we buy from Russian giants like Rosneft. So, in effect, I mean, could this anyway be forcing India's hand? Because if the sanctions have been, increased, and I don't have immediate specifics right now, I mean, I don't know if Indian buyers, IOC, HPCL, BPCL, whether they'll have a real workaround with higher sanctions coming in on the biggest Russian entities. Maybe quick 10 seconds if you have a point here, Mr. Das.
Certainly, this is part of the pressure tactics, negotiating tactics to compel India to agree to US terms at the last stage. And it's always what happens in negotiations. That's what Trump is doing at this juncture.
And Mr. Palit, when we took your earlier point, you're saying you wouldn't give in so quickly, but with sanctions, more sanctions. But how do we buy Russian oil, even if we want to continue buying up to that 1.8 million barrels a day that Parikshit was alluding to?
So the quick point that I'd like to make here is that, you see, tariffs are beginning to end as a geoeconomic ploy. They have had their run. It's now going to move to other directions. It's going to be refinery-specific sanctions. It's going to be a large number of other ploys that are going to come into play. Unfortunately, India is going to be at the receiving end of most of these because of its economic size and the depth of its engagement, not just with the United States, but with the global South. So India really cannot avoid the US effort to squeeze it inside economically within a limited space from a large variety of areas. So having said that, my simple point at this stage would be that I do understand the heavy pressure that is there on Indian negotiators at this stage to relax on the subject of Russian oil. Perhaps that might be the way forward for the immediate time being, but this has to be accepted with the fact that more will be coming by way of coercive and extractive tactics going forward.
All right, gentlemen, let's see how this indeed evolves and whether at least, as Mr. Palit is saying, even if we get that pause, if not a final, cessation of trade hostilities as it has come to pass. Thank you so much for joining in. Valuable inputs, and we'll keep talking to you as the news evolves on this front. Thanks for being with us today.